Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here, former federal prosecutor, former Army JAG. I want to talk for a few minutes today about Bill Lack-of-Candor Barr, Attorney General of the United States, who we all have come to realize behaves more like the president's personal lawyer, his defense attorney, his fixer. And his latest dangerous frolic is threatening to sue the states that don't reopen quickly enough for Donald Trump's taste. So we have governors around the country who are trying to protect the health and the well-being, the very lives of their citizens. And if Donald Trump thinks that they are staying closed too long, or their stay-at-home orders are in place to the detriment of the economy in Donald Trump's estimation, then he wants Bill Barr to sue those states, or at least have the Department of Justice join suits against those states brought by others. So bring the full Department of Justice to bear on governors, on state governments, to force them to reopen prematurely and perhaps in a way that is not in the public health interest of that state or of its citizens. That's Bill Barr's latest dangerous frolic. You know, what do we know about Bill Barr? Let's recap a little bit, because we know that recently, just last month, a federal district court judge, Reggie Walton, issued a long written scathing opinion about Bill Barr, the Attorney General of the United States. And he said, Bill Barr, and I quote, lacks candor, closed quote. That's not all he said, but he said Bill Barr lacks candor. What a thing for a federal court judge to say about the Attorney General. Who is Reggie Walton? Again, let's recap. Reggie Walton, in 1981, he was appointed as a judge first by Ronald Reagan. In 1991, he was reappointed as a judge by George H.W. Bush. In 2001, he was appointed as a federal court judge by George W. Bush. And in 2007, he was designated as a FISA court judge by Chief Justice Roberts of the Supreme Court. Anybody want to accuse Judge Reggie Walton of being a liberal? Judge Reggie Walton said, among other things, in some FOIA litigation, Freedom of Information Act litigation, where some parties were suing to try to get the unredacted Mueller report, because you know what? The people deserve to see what's in it. Bill Barr entered that litigation for the Department of Justice and said, no, trust me, Judge Walton, all those redactions that I made, they were all necessary and appropriate. Judge Walton said, no, you lack candor. Let me see the unredacted Mueller report, and I will decide what needs to be given over to the litigants and ultimately to the public. And Judge Walton is undertaking that review, and hopefully we're going to hear some resolution of that issue soon. So let me ask you this, folks. Did you really need to have Judge Reggie Walton tell you that Bill Barr lacked candor? Remember Senator Kamala Harris questioning, some might say cross-examining, pretty darn effectively, Bill Barr in his Senate testimony? You remember that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Barr, has the President or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone?
I wouldn't.
Yes or no?
Could you repeat that question?
I will repeat it.
Yeah.
Has the President or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone? Yes or no, please, sir?
The President or anybody else?
Seems you would remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yeah, but I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest. I mean, there have been discussions of matters out there that they have not asked me to open an investigation, but
Perhaps they've suggested,
I don't know. I wouldn't say suggest.
hinted,
I don't know.
inferred. You don't know. Okay.
Bill Barr, when asked if the president or anybody at the White House suggested opening an investigation into anyone, he had to grapple with what the word suggest means. Come on, folks. I mean, you could see that he was not being straight with Senator Harris in his sworn testimony. And when you lie under oath in Senate testimony, it is perjury. So Judge Reggie Walton, in a written opinion, said that Bill Barr lacks candor. We all saw Bill Barr lacking candor in real time when he was being questioned by Senator Harris. Now let's turn to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Jeffrey Epstein, longtime sexual offender who got away with it down in Florida when then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta authored one of the most horrendous non-prosecution agreements that I ever saw in my 30 years as a federal prosecutor. In fact, I never saw anything like it. And that's something that will have to be addressed when we have a law enforcing attorney general again in January. I'm confident he or she will dig into that. But the Southern District of New York ultimately brought charges against Jeffrey Epstein. Good for them for doing their job. And Jeffrey Epstein was imprisoned or was detained pending trial. And Jeffrey Epstein turns up dead. Now, how many rich, connected, influential men could Jeffrey Epstein have given up if he flipped, if he cooperated, if he turned state's evidence? Quite a few. You saw those tapes of Epstein and Trump partying together back in the day. That is not incriminating evidence in and of itself, but we have to ask the question, who could Jeffrey Epstein have given up if he had decided to cooperate? So there was no way people were going to run the risk of having a Jeffrey Epstein flip and cooperate. So what happens? He turns up dead in his cell. Now, Bill Barr virtually sprints to the nearest camera and tries to convince the American people that before the body is even cold, before an autopsy has been performed, before any forensic testing has been done, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, suicide, take my word for it. Come on now. I mean, I've reviewed the evidence that has been made available to the public, and it's not much, and I think we need a full, fair, and transparent investigation into what happened to Jeffrey Epstein before anybody can say it was a suicide and not a homicide. I have my suspicions based on what I have reviewed. But again, a law-abiding attorney general will have to tackle this come January, and I am confident he or she will. But that is yet another instance of Bill Barr trying to mislead the public, because the only thing an attorney general should have ever said at that moment when a high-profile defendant is found dead in a cell, I contend he shouldn't have said anything. But if the Department of Justice was to issue a press release about it, the only thing it should have said was, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell today. An investigation is underway, and we will have no further comment until the conclusion of that investigation. Not Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, take my word for it, folks, which is what Bill Lack-of-Candor Barr tried to sell to the American people. How about Roger Stone? What was Bill Barr's involvement in the Roger Stone prosecution? Well, 3 career prosecutors, including 2 of my former colleagues from the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, prosecuted Roger Stone. I was in court for most of the trial. They did a remarkable job. Roger Stone was rightly convicted because the evidence of his guilt was overwhelming. And as the sentencing date approached, the prosecutors filed a sentencing memorandum with a sentencing recommendation based on the U.S. sentencing guidelines. And once that was filed in court as a public document, The next thing you know, Donald Trump tweets, yeah, this is unfair and it's horrible and it's a miscarriage of justice, says Donald Trump about his old friend and political operative and frankly intermediary to WikiLeaks, Roger Stone. And I say intermediary to WikiLeaks because Steve Bannon testified under oath at the Roger Stone trial. I saw it, and he said, and I quote, Roger Stone was the Trump campaign's access point to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So here we have the president weighing in on behalf of his friend and political operative, Roger Stone, to say the sentencing recommendation is outrageous. So the next day, Bill Barr tells the three prosecutors, you need to lighten up. You need to go easier on Roger Stone. And they are forced, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia is forced to file a watered-down sentencing memo, prompting all three prosecutors to immediately quit the case. And I have to say, one of those prosecutors, one of the lead prosecutors, his name is John Kravis, somebody who I worked with in homicide years ago at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. John Kravis is a talented prosecutor. He was a talented homicide prosecutor, and then he became really one of the premier public corruption prosecutors in the whole Department of Justice. Not only did he quit the Roger Stone case, he immediately resigned from the federal government based on Bill Barr's conduct. You know what that does? That deprives the people of the United States of the benefit of one of our premier public corruption prosecutors. All thanks to Bill Barr, helping do a favor for Donald Trump's friend. And you know, folks, that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of some of Bill Lack-of-Candor Barr's dangerous frolics. We all saw him try to exonerate the president by saying Bob Mueller basically said, nah, there's no obstruction here. And when you think about it, and when you review Volume 2 of the Mueller report, there were actually about 10 instances of obstruction of justice laid out in the evidence by Bob Mueller. And that is a blueprint for the prosecution of Donald Trump once he leaves office, make no mistake about it. But we all know that Bill Barr tried to mischaracterize and spin the findings and conclusions of the Mueller report. How do we know that? We know that because, one, in Judge Walton's findings, he said Bill Barr tried to spin the Mueller report. Bill Barr mischaracterized the conclusions of the Mueller report, all of which prompted Judge Reggie Walton to say Bill Barr lacks candor. Is it any surprise, folks, that as far back as 1992, conservative columnist for the New York Times, William Safire, dubbed Bill Barr the cover-up general for his allegedly burying information and evidence in the Iran-Contra affair. Everything old is new again. The only remaining question is, how much longer do we have to endure Bill Lack-of-Candor Barr enabling and emboldening a criminal president? Is he really going to go on to sue the states to make Americans unsafe by forcing them against the orders of their own governors and government to go back to work, to put a premature end to the stay-at-home orders? Is that really what we are going to allow and endure? The good news, folks, and there's always good news, is we have a November election coming up. And if you thought the 2018 midterms were a blue wave, no, we ain't seen nothing yet. Justice is coming. Please stay safe. Please stay coronavirus free, and I hope to see you all again soon.